Great, and I'm live. Hello, friends. The first thing I will say is that if I put this up on YouTube and I send you the link, I'd really love for you all to subscribe, comment, share, because this is the only way I have of sharing my insights with the world. We're at a stage now where I think most people who are intelligent realize that the systems we're using in Europe, in Africa, around the world aren't working. They're causing more and more and more pain for ordinary people around the world. And the only people who are having a blast are the wealthy. When I say wealthy, I mean the kind of the obscenely wealthy. I'm talking billionaires, literally the 1% who control something like 90% of the assets on our dear planet. And under these circumstances, one can't help but realize that we can't continue as we have been till now. And yet, people, for the lack of an alternative point of view, slavishly continue to do things which have only proven to everybody in the past that it causes us trouble. And these troubles continue to mount. This is a post asking, what is your frequency? I'll explain that later. And also, what is your personal level of density? Because actually, even if you and I are part of the 95% who are relatively powerless, we provide the energy, the intention to maintain this edifice in the way that it's running. So if we can sort out what our personal frequencies are and sort out what our personal density is, you and I can change this whole game into one that we would like it to be. So I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about weapons of war and what they can do. Secondly, the weapons we as ordinary people have. And thirdly, whether or not we want to continue living the lie. So first of all, weapons of war. If you go to a gunfight, you're hugely ill-advised to take a knife. If you go to a shooting war, you can go to the shooting war with missiles like spears, bows and arrows and so on. Or you can go to the shooting war with an AR-15 fully automatic armor-light rifle, a sniper scope, a sniper's rifle, which can actually drop a target a mile away, so long as you've got a clear line of sight of what you're shooting at. You'll bring it down. It's got a 50 caliber slug, and so on. So if you're fighting a battle, and I use that because it's a dramatic kind of image, if you're fighting the battle of life, you can't afford to bring a knife to what is effectively a gunfight, or bows and arrows up against people who are using armor lights. Yeah. So what weapons do we personally possess in this battle to lead happy, fruitful, peaceful lives? The two principal weapons, in my humble opinion, is the frequency at which we resonate, and secondly, the density of our lives. What do I mean by frequency? The frequency of a human being defines their ability to create value totally. Do you know that there are certain sound frequencies that you and I as human beings won't ever hear because our ears aren't attuned to it? Dogs hear them absolutely loud and clear, hence the phenomenon of the dog whistle. It's something which only dogs can hear and is occulted from the human ear. when it comes to the spectrum of light, this shocked me the other day when I was kind of mugging up on this, is that we only see about 1, 2, or 3% of the light spectrum, meaning that what we see as the totality of our environment is a minuscule sliver. If it was a cake, it'd be a huge cake, and all we have access to in that cake is a tiny little sliver of that cake. And yet we think we're seeing reality. We're not seeing reality. This is perfectly analogous to the person who says, hey, guys, we're at war and let's go and fight. And make sure that you bring all your bowie knives and your hunting knives and so on. And you go up into an army, facing an army which is ranged up with automatic weapons. You won't last a nanosecond. That, it seems to me, is exactly what human beings are doing. So it begs the question, what of our personal weapons, first of all, our frequency, how high is the frequency at which you and I resonate? If you presented it in terms of light, how wide is the spectrum of light we can perceive? In terms of sound, how wide is the spectrum of sound that we can hear? Because the wider our perception, the wider our consciousness, the more we can see reality. The lower our consciousness, the lower our perception, the easier we are to gaslight, fool, and be conned into making decisions, taking decisions, which actually lead to our personal destruction. Now, I'm going to go back to this idea of frequency. Do you know, if a wave form has a very high frequency, you'll see that the zigzags, the sine wave that's caused, goes across like this very fast. And if the central axis of the sine wave is what we call truth or reality, the person who is resonating at a high frequency perceives that truth far more often than the person who is operating at a very low frequency, whose sine wave signature is a much slower undulating wave. So in the space, say, of a minute, the person who is operating at high frequency crosses the truth line 60 times, 60 cycles. And the person who is on a very low frequency, depending on how low their frequency is, they may cross the truth line maybe twice in a minute. And so what happens is that the consciousness of the guy whose frequency is high is seeing much more of the truth as it actually is than the person who is at a very low level of consciousness, very low level of frequency. Now, of course, those who resonate at a higher frequency may want to keep the consciousness of ordinary people very low. Why? So that they can be predated on. I mean, they become like cockroaches underfoot, or herds of cattle or sheep who can be manipulated this way and that. And because their frequency is so low, they won't get it. Now I'm going to talk about density. Density refers to the ability of the subject to integrate with the environment. The more dense and solid you are, the more you're much more likely to crash into other things, so that your association with your environment becomes hugely conflictual. Yeah. So if, for example, you take something like the air around us, which has a very low density. It blows through the leaves, it blows through around buildings, it blows over hills, over the seas, and so on. But something which is much more dense, like a rock, if you throw a rock through the leaves, it will crash into branches, leaves, and so on and so forth. And rather than traversing through the leaves, it'll lose momentum and drop. The air doesn't do that. The air whistles clean through. And by whistling clean through, it is living a level of density which can embrace and enfold everything. So the characteristic of a life of heavy density is that of what they call duality. Duality refers to a phenomenon of binary opposition. So that when you throw a rock, which is very dense, at a wall, which is also very dense, when the rock hits the wall, it loses momentum and falls down. However, if the rock is incredibly dense and is traveling with sufficient momentum, it'll punch a hole through the wall. The issue isn't whether or not you're punching a hole through the wall or not. The issue is the fact that this is a life of conflict. Somebody has to die. So the problem with a life of heavy density or high density is that it's you or me or you. It's never me and you or you and me, because it's a life of duality, a life of binary opposition. So when our lives operate at a level of deep density, all we do is fight with each other. And the guy who wins is the guy who has the greatest density and has the greatest force or the greatest momentum, and he'll just crush all the others. Look at the history of mankind. First World War, maybe 20 million people died. Second World War, it's estimated maybe 80 million people died. Genocides to a penny in human history. And mostly controlled by those with the greatest force and the greatest momentum. Now that in a very dense environment is considered progress. Actually, the most destructive genocidal person is considered the most powerful and most advanced. Now, any sort of logic, ethics, and morality tells you straight away that's stupid thinking. The only person who can stand that up and make it work is a person who understands is operating at a very low frequency and can't see more than the tiny sliver of the cake that's being presented to them, the cake of life that's being presented to them. Again, because their frequency is very, very low. So I'm going to give you another example. Actually, this is one of my pets, which I've got in front of me at the moment, is that there's a professional platform called LinkedIn. And it's taken me ages to work out why going on LinkedIn leaves me feeling really weirded out. Penny dropped a few days ago. The frequency of LinkedIn and its density, the frequency of LinkedIn is very low. It's got nothing to do with intelligence. Your frequency is not a measure of your intelligence. It's only a measure of your consciousness. Okay? But the frequency of LinkedIn is appallingly low. And the density of LinkedIn is incredibly heavy. So when you go on LinkedIn, it becomes a battle of forces, like the rock trying to punch through the wall, somebody dies. And it's the rocks which are being fired, the hardest rocks which are being fired with the greatest force that dominate LinkedIn. Go on there and have a look and see. And what happens there, therefore, is that those who don't have so much density go on there and try and ape the people with the heavy density, who are the least conscious people of all, though not the least intelligent. Again, let's make a a distinction between intelligence and consciousness. And what I know is that having a limited force de frappe, as the French would call it, the capacity for strike, I'm not prepared to go in there and behave like a little marionette, like a puppet on a string, as I see 9 out of 10 people on LinkedIn doing. Do you know, they look, but actually it would embarrass me to go on there and to behave like a puppet on a stage created by people of very low consciousness to manipulate everybody else into thinking that this is what they need to do to advance themselves. I just find it, I'm sorry, I find it awful. This brings me to my final point on this post about living the lie. The question you must then ask yourself is, what is your personal frequency, i.e. your ability to perceive reality? How wide of the spectrum can you perceive, i.e. how much of the truth in which we all live can you see? And secondly, what is your level of density? Are you more like the air which can embrace everybody? Or are you more like a ballistically propelled rock of high density? By the way, I mean, when I say rock, don't limit yourself. I mean, it could be a nuclear tipped projectile. That's what they use. Depleted uranium projectiles. That's what they use to punch through 9 inches of armor on a main battle tank. It'll go clean through, like a knife through butter. And of course, everybody in the tank will die and the thing will blow up and they'll all be incinerated in seconds. But the projectile will get through, and the guy who fired it will come across and say that he is the more advanced or the better. Which, of course, as you and I hope, can see clearly that this is a situation of lunacy, which we are all being prevailed upon to replicate on a day-by-day basis. So, what is your level of consciousness? Are you prepared to live the lie? Because continuing to live the lie means every time somebody comes along with enough money to tell you that you need to take this medication for your sake and the sake of the world, if they have the capacity to tell you this story on a 24/7 basis, because they also have the power to control all of the media, if they have the capacity through government agents who act as their agents to create policies which can monitor you, your behavior, your thoughts, your words on a real-time basis, what's the difference between that and being a sheep in a herd, or a cow in a herd, or a cockroach which can basically be just rubbed out at the behest of whoever owns the biggest boot? And this is why I'm saying that the world has now come to a crossroads where the old low frequency, high density, binary oppositional way of life can't continue. Now, here's the irony. Aboriginal people in every culture known to man, Native Americans, Native Australians, Native African, I would say Native Indian, I would say Native Papuans, New Guineans, Native Europeans know that the purpose of this life is to live in harmony with nature. You don't need to set up think tanks and then finance young people to go and chuck bits of paint over priceless treasures like Vincent van Gogh's stuff. It can't be reproduced again. It's a one-off, it's a single edition piece of art. Or to cause a sufficient anxiety over thinking that priceless human treasures can be blown up, destroyed, defaced, and so on and so forth, that they get us to think right, especially bearing in mind that the rat race, the mass consumption, mass production society, was created by the very people who now own these think tanks, which are coming around and telling people that they've got to change their carbon footprint. The very people who created monopolies in oil, the very people who got the world reserve currency done in the name of their own native currencies so that they could control the world. They're flipping that around. I remember the days when in the West, what's his name? Wasn't Tesla, it was the other guy. But anyway, the guy who was important for creating radar, which saved Britain's bacon against the Germans, who were in many other ways far more technologically advanced. And the war, he was gay. Turing is the name I'm thinking of. He was gay. He was absolutely demonized. This guy saved the bacon of his people and his country. But nope, he was gay and slept with the wrong people, loved the wrong people. He was demonized, absolutely demonized. He was criminalized. Now, these very self-same people are now going around the world telling the people in Qatar, how dare you make gayness haram according to your religion. Haram means forbidden, illegal, wrong, that sort of thing. How dare you follow this haram code of conduct and actually, outlaw gayness when even some of the referees who were going to the World Cup are gay. So the hypocrisy and the double standards of that, all of that is a manifestation of a heavy density, dualistic, oppositional world, and that which we must slough off. So there we have it. If we are going to go forward in this world, it's not just a job for Ted Kofi, who's wittering on at 8:13 on the morning of the 10th of November, recording this video. It behoves every single one of us to now seek actively the means by which we can raise our frequency, raise our consciousness, and reduce our density so that we can embrace life without being toxic to life. Toxicity is anything that disrespects human life. In the West, let's say in Europe, racism is the first thing of all, and it's because it's used to support and buttress things like white privilege and so on and so forth. Of course, people are bribed into supporting this incredibly dense, toxic, low frequency mindset despite what they say. And again, lastly, reminding you, you can be incredibly toxic, high density, low frequency, and be hyper intelligent at the same time. In fact, intelligence as a measure of worth in and of itself is a very dense, very low frequency measure of the worth and the value of life. So, my friends, that's it. I hope you watch this to the end, because I think I landed some of the better points at the end there. And thank you very much for listening. If you watch this, I'll share it on Facebook, on Rumble, and on YouTube. If you see it anywhere, please do subscribe. Have a great day.